Especially because my parents aren't around. Man, I miss them.
Just to be sure, this video contains spoilers. The show ultimately accepts the unpleasant reality about Niles and Daphne in regard to the events of the revival in Frasier Reboot Episode 4. Frasier Crane has been resettling in Boston after a major change in plans encouraged him to return to the city he once called home. Fresh from his trip to Seattle, where he attended his father, Martin Crane's, funeral, his new adventures are on the other side of the country, requiring him to navigate the complexities of his new job lecturing at Harvard and his complicated relationship with Freddie without the assistance of his brother, Niles. It's strange that Frasier leaves Seattle so soon after Martin's burial in the Frasier remake. He could have easily stayed in his hometown to be close to family at this time of mourning, having quit his hosting career in Chicago and broken up with Charlotte. Given how close he is to Niles and his wife, Daphne, one would think he would prefer to spend time back in Seattle, especially since he isn't obligated to work again as a result of his success spearheading Dr. Crane. Unfortunately, there are factors that compelled Frasier to leave his homeland and return to Beantown.
I wanted to stop in and check on my son.
Well, didn't you just see Freddie in Seattle?
Why aren't David Hyde Pierce and Jane leaves in the Frasier reboot? Originally, the Frasier revival was supposed to reunite the original cast, including Niles and Daphne. Kelsey Grammer, who not only stars in but also produces the Paramount Plus project, approached David Hyde Pierce and Jane Leaves about the idea. Unfortunately, both of them declined the project. It's unclear whether they were offered a cameo instead of a regular part of the series, but Pierce expressly stated that he felt he had done everything he could with his character as Niles. In any case, his view should come as no surprise, given his previous opposition to resurrecting Frasier. Little is known about Leaves' choice, but it is likely that it was linked to Pierce's. This makes sense, given how closely their characters are linked. It's even more doubtful to see Daphne return in the Frasier reboot without Niles, as it would simply raise suspicions about their relationship's condition. Although they do not appear physically in the Paramount Plus project, it is assumed that they are still dedicated to and in love with each other.
Especially because my parents aren't around. Man, I miss them.
They still live in Seattle, which is why they no longer hang out with Frasier, though their son, David, does. In Frasier Episode 4, David admits that he misses his parents. In the 4th episode of the Frasier reboot, Trivial Pursuits, David assists his uncle in cooking for Freddie and his fellow firefighters by delivering the necessary goods. As he sits in the firehouse, he expresses his longing for his parents, aptly expressing what everyone feels about life without Daphne and Niles. The Frasier remake has divided critics and fans alike, but one thing that all sides agree on is how much Pierce and Leaves are missing from the new show. Without those two key characters, David effectively expressed how everyone thinks about the new program. Unfortunately, Freddie's firefighting pals misread David's remark, believing he was an orphan. Neither Frasier nor his son are aware of this misunderstanding, and David is far too excited to be the center of attention in the firehouse. It's unclear whether the Frasier remake will make a big deal out of this misinterpretation in future episodes. However, because the show doesn't provide regular updates on Niles and Daphne, it may become a recurring joke or be forgotten entirely. Where are Niles and Daphne in the Frasier reboot? The Frasier reboot did an excellent job of catching fans up on what Frasier has been up to over the last 2 decades. He was in a long-term relationship with Claire and presented a popular TV show in Chicago called Dr. Crane. He was in Seattle to see his father before heading to Boston. Despite this, there hasn't been much new information regarding Daphne and Niles' lives since the original show ended. Frasier didn't even mention how his brother responded to Martin's death, though he did note that his wife offered a toast during the funeral. Based on this, it's safe to assume Niles and Daphne chose to raise their family in Seattle. Although they could have visited Daphne's homeland, David's lack of a British accent shows that he was raised in the United States. For what it's worth, the couple was pleased with their arrangement in Emerald City. Niles had a successful private practice, and they were close to family and friends. They were content with their lives in the Pacific Northwest, unlike Frasier, who felt forced to relocate. Being in Seattle also offers the Frasier reboot an excuse not to include them. Will Niles and Daphne return in the Frasier reboot? While Pierce and Leaves declined Grammer's request to join the Frasier reboot, they maintained a close friendship. This means that if they discover a compelling reason to resume their roles as Niles and Daphne in the future, the couple may appear in the revival. However, it has been announced that neither of them will appear in the first season of the Frasier remake. However, if Paramount Plus decides to renew the comedy after that, Grammer and his crew can approach Pierce and Leaves again to propose a Niles and Daphne cameo in the project. Narratively, incorporating Niles and Daphne into the Frasier reboot won't be difficult. Returning to Seattle seems unlikely, given that the new show is attempting to distinguish itself from its predecessor, and doing so would be paradoxical. However, Niles and Daphne should have no trouble flying to Boston, not only to see Frasier, but also to spend time with David. Perhaps they're on their way to a European vacation and decide to stop in Beantown. It may be quick, but if executed properly, it will have a significant impact on the Frasier reboot.